The sweet scent of vanilla and cinnamon should have filled me with joy, but instead it made my stomach clench with a terror so profound I could barely breathe. Standing in the kitchen of Rodriguez Family Catering, watching my cousin Jessica carefully arrange the traditional Mexican wedding cookies on their silver platters, I felt the familiar weight of dread settle over my shoulders like a funeral shroud. These weren't just any polvorones. These were the same cookies that had killed me 6 months ago. But here's the thing about second chances that nobody tells you in the movies. They don't come with an instruction manual. When you wake up in your old bed, in your old life, with the vivid memory of your own death burning behind your eyelids, you have to figure out pretty quickly whether you're going insane or whether the universe just handed you the most terrifying gift imaginable. For me, it took exactly 3 days of checking and double-checking dates, of staring at my reflection in disbelief, of touching everything around me to make sure it was real, before I accepted the impossible truth. I was back. 6 months before my wedding to Ryan. 6 months before Jessica would slip oleander extract into the family recipe and watch me die with a smile on her face. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light streaming through the kitchen windows of our family's catering business felt different this time around. Every shadow seemed sharper, every sound more significant. I watched Jessica move around the familiar space with practiced ease, her dark hair pulled back in that perfect ponytail she always wore when she wanted to appear professional and trustworthy. She wore the same powder blue blouse she'd worn that day in my previous life, the one that made her look innocent and helpful. The same blouse she'd been wearing when she'd leaned over my hospital bed and whispered her confession into my dying ear, thinking I was too far gone to understand her words. "I never wanted to hurt you, Emma," she'd said then, her voice thick with crocodile tears. "But Ryan was supposed to be mine. The business was supposed to be mine. Everything you have should have been mine. You were always Mom's favorite, always Uncle Miguel's little princess. I just wanted what was fair." Then she'd straightened up, composing herself before the doctors came back, transforming once again into the grieving cousin who'd rushed to the hospital when she heard about our tragic accident, because that's what everyone thought it was. A terrible accident. Food poisoning from a bad batch of seafood at our rehearsal dinner, followed by a car crash when Ryan, desperate to get me to the hospital, had lost control on the rain-slicked streets of Portland. 2 young lives cut short by a series of unfortunate events. Jessica had even given a beautiful eulogy at our joint funeral, talking about how much she'd loved us both, how she'd never get over losing her dearest cousin and the man she'd always thought of as a brother. Lies had rolled off her tongue as easily as honey from a spoon. Now, standing in the same kitchen where she'd prepared my death sentence, I felt a cold clarity settle over me like morning fog rolling in from the Columbia River. This time, I knew exactly what she was planning. This time, I had 6 months to prepare. This time, I wasn't going to be the victim. Jessica looked up from her careful arrangement of cookies, and for just a moment I saw something flicker in her green eyes. Something calculating and cruel that she quickly masked with her trademark smile. "Emma, I didn't hear you come in. You're here early today." Her voice carried that same musical quality that had always fooled our family, the same tone that made everyone think she was the sweetest, most considerate girl in the world. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, keeping my own voice carefully neutral. "You know how it is with the wedding coming up. So many details to finalize." The words felt strange in my mouth. In my previous life, I'd been genuinely excited about these final preparations, blissfully unaware that my cousin was planning my murder. Now, every word felt like a chess move in a game where I finally knew the rules. Jessica's smile widened, and I caught the brief flash of something predatory in her expression. "Oh, I know exactly how you feel. So much pressure to make everything perfect, isn't there? Especially with the family business reputation on the line." She gestured toward the trays of cookies with obvious pride. "I've been working on these since 5 this morning. I wanted to make sure they were absolutely perfect for your special day." Perfect. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. These cookies would indeed be perfect, perfectly lethal. I remembered how she'd insisted on handling this particular batch. Personally, how she'd claimed it was her special wedding gift to me. A family recipe with her own secret ingredient that would make them unforgettable. The secret ingredient, I now knew, was oleander extract, carefully distilled from the beautiful flowering bushes that grew in abundance around Portland. Tasteless when mixed properly, virtually undetectable in autopsy, unless specifically tested, and absolutely deadly when consumed in sufficient quantities. My cousin had done her homework. "It looked beautiful, Jess," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. "You always were the artistic one in the family." This was true, actually. Jessica had always possessed a natural talent for visual presentation, for making things look perfect on the surface. It was fitting that she'd chosen a career in real estate, where creating appealing facades was half the job. What our family had never realized was how deep her talent for deception actually ran. She practically glowed at the compliment, and I saw her shoulders relax slightly. Good. I needed her to feel confident, secure in her plan. "I just want everything to be special for you," she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "You know how much you mean to me, Emma. You're not just my cousin. You're like the sister I never had. The sister she never had. The sister she was planning to murder out of jealousy and entitlement." I nodded and smiled, playing my part in this twisted family drama. "I feel the same way about you, Jess. I can't imagine going through all this without your support." As she turned back to her work, I took the opportunity to really study her. Jessica Carter had always been beautiful in that polished, Instagram-ready way that seemed effortless but actually required hours of daily maintenance. Her skin was flawless, her makeup subtle but perfect, her clothes always carefully chosen to project success and sophistication. She looked like the kind of woman who had everything together, who lived a charmed life full of accomplishments and happiness. The reality I'd learned in my previous life was quite different. Jessica was drowning in debt from trying to maintain her lifestyle. Her real estate career, while appearing successful, was built on a foundation of borrowed money and inflated claims. She lived in a luxury high-rise apartment she couldn't afford, drove a BMW that was 3 payments away from repossession, and had maxed out 6 credit cards trying to keep up appearances. She'd been counting on inheriting a significant portion of the family business when our grandmother passed away. But those hopes had been dashed when the will revealed that everything was being left to my mother, with the understanding that I would eventually take over operations. That inheritance, combined with her obsession with Ryan, had pushed her over the edge into homicide. In my previous life, I'd been completely oblivious to her financial struggles. I'd seen the expensive clothes and the fancy apartment and assumed she was thriving. I'd never thought to look deeper, to question why she was always so interested in the business's finances, why she asked so many questions about our grandmother's estate planning, why she seemed to know exactly how much money our family had and where it was invested. Now, with the benefit of hindsight and my own secret resources, I could see the desperation hidden beneath her polished exterior. The way her smile never quite reached her eyes when discussing money. The tension in her shoulders when she thought. No one was looking. The subtle tells that revealed someone living constantly on the edge of financial disaster. "You know," Jessica said casually, interrupting my observations, "I was thinking we should do something special for the wedding cake cutting ceremony. Maybe have you and Ryan feed each other the first bites, and then I could serve pieces to the immediate family. It would be such a sweet tradition, and I'd love to be part of that moment." My blood ran cold. This was new. In my previous life, she'd simply insisted on being the one to plate the desserts for the head table, claiming it was part of her maid of honor duties. But apparently, she decided to make her attack even more personal this time around. Wanted to watch me take that first bite? Wanted to see the exact moment the poison began its work? "That sounds lovely," I managed to say, though my throat felt tight. "Why do you always think of such thoughtful details?" She beamed at me, and for a terrifying moment, I saw genuine pleasure in her expression. She was actually looking forward to this. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Jessica wasn't just planning to kill me out of desperation or financial need. She was going to enjoy it. This changed everything. In my previous life, I'd tried to rationalize her actions after learning the truth. I'd told myself that she'd been driven to desperation, that she'd never intended for things to go so far. Maybe she'd even felt guilty about what she'd done. Now I could see that I'd been naive, even in death. Jessica Carter was a killer by choice, not by circumstance. She'd found a solution that satisfied both her financial needs and her deep-seated resentment of my life. And she was savoring every moment of the planning. The knowledge should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over my shoulders. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about justice. And thanks to the 6 months I'd gained, I was going to be very, very ready for her. I should probably get going, I said, glancing at my watch. I'm meeting David for coffee before work. David Chen, my new boyfriend, the man who represented everything Ryan hadn't been able to give me. Where Ryan had been sweet but passive, David was protective and proactive. Where Ryan had been content to go along with family dynamics, David asked hard questions and pushed back when something didn't feel right. Most importantly, David didn't know Jessica, which meant he couldn't be manipulated by her practiced charm. Jessica's expression flickered just for a moment with something that might have been disappointment. Oh, you're still seeing that graphic designer? I thought that was just a casual thing. It's getting more serious, I replied, watching her reaction carefully. In my previous life, I'd been engaged to Ryan at this point, planning our spring wedding with innocent excitement. This time around, I'd made different choices. I'd broken up with Ryan gently, but firmly, explaining that I needed time to figure myself out, and I'd started dating David instead. It had been a painful decision. Ryan was a good man who didn't deserve to die for my cousin's jealousy. But it was necessary. If Jessica's plan revolved around eliminating me and stealing my fiancé, then removing Ryan from the equation might force her to show her hand differently. He seems nice, Jessica said carefully, but I caught the calculation in her eyes. She was already adapting, already figuring out how to work this new variable into her plans. Very different from Ryan. Yes, he is. I picked up my purse and moved toward the door, but paused as if struck by a sudden thought. Oh, Jess. I meant to ask, how are things going with your real estate business? I saw that house on Burnside finally sold. It must have been a relief. The question was carefully chosen. The Burnside property had been one of Jessica's biggest listings, and in my previous timeline, it had fallen through spectacularly, costing her a significant commission and pushing her deeper into debt. I was curious to see if she'd tell me the truth about her current financial situation. Her smile faltered for just a second. Oh, that. Well, there were some complications with the financing, but we're working through them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. These things happen in real estate. The lie came smoothly, but I could see the stress lines around her eyes. The deal had definitely fallen through again, which meant her financial pressure was exactly where I expected it to be. I'm sure it will work out, I said with false sympathy. You're so good at what you do. If anyone can salvage a difficult situation, it's you. The compliment was calculated to feed her ego, while also demonstrating that I was still the same trusting, supportive cousin she remembered. She straightened up slightly, clearly pleased by the praise. Thank you, Emma. That means a lot coming from you. You know, I've always looked up to you, looked up to me, right up until she decided to murder me. I smiled and waved goodbye, stepping out into the crisp Portland morning air. The cherry trees lining the street were just beginning to bloom, their pale pink flowers creating a romantic backdrop that felt almost mocking given the circumstances. This was supposed to be a time of new beginnings, of hope and love and family, celebration. Instead, I was living in a nightmare that most people would never believe. But as I walked toward my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in my previous life, a sense of power. Jessica thought she was the predator, and I was the prey. But she had no idea that the game had changed. She didn't know about the successful digital marketing company I'd built under a pseudonym over the past 3 years. She didn't know about the private investigator I'd already hired to document her activities. She didn't know about the forensic accountant who was quietly reviewing her financial records. Most importantly, She didn't know that her intended victim remembered every single detail of how she'd planned and executed a perfect murder. This time, the perfect murder was going to be her downfall, not mine. I climbed into my Honda Civic, the same modest car I'd driven in my previous life, chosen specifically to maintain the illusion that I was still struggling financially, and pulled out my phone. 3 missed calls from David, probably wondering if I was still on for coffee, to text messages from my mother, asking about final headcount numbers for the family gathering this weekend, and 1 email notification from my business account, informing me that Phoenix Digital Marketing had just landed another major client. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Jessica was plotting my death to steal an inheritance that would solve her money problems, I was quietly building a fortune that could buy and sell her lifestyle 10 times over. If she'd simply asked for help, if she'd been honest about her struggles, I would have given her a job, helped her get back on her feet, maybe even offered her a partnership in the family business. But Jessica Carter had never been interested in earning what she wanted. She preferred to take it. As I drove through the familiar streets of Portland toward my coffee date with David, I allowed myself a small smile. In exactly 6 months, Jessica would discover just how expensive that preference was going to be. This time, she wouldn't just lose everything she'd schemed to steal. She would lose everything she already had, and she would do it in front of everyone who'd ever believed in her innocent act. The wedding cookies she was so carefully preparing weren't going to be my death sentence. They were going to be hers. The memory of my death came to me in fragments during those first few weeks after my return, like pieces of a shattered mirror reflecting different angles of the same horrific truth. I would be brushing my teeth or making coffee, and suddenly I'd be back in that hospital bed, tubes down my throat, machines beeping frantically around me, while Jessica sat beside me with her perfectly manicured hands folded in her lap, waiting for me to die. The oleander poisoning hadn't been quick or painless like in the movies. It had started with what seemed like food poisoning from our rehearsal dinner at Mama Chen's restaurant on Hawthorne. Stomach cramps, nausea, sweating. Ryan had been affected too, but not as severely because he'd eaten fewer of the contaminated cookies. I remembered him holding my hair back as I vomited, his face pale with worry as my condition rapidly deteriorated. We'd both thought it was bad seafood or maybe cross-contamination in the kitchen. Within 2 hours, my heart had started racing, uncontrollably. My vision blurred and I began experiencing seizures. Ryan, panicking, had loaded me into his car to rush me to OHSU. But the oleander had affected my nervous system so severely that I'd gone into convulsions in the passenger seat. He'd lost control of the vehicle on the steep, winding road leading up to the hospital, slamming into the guardrail at 60 miles per hour. Ryan had died instantly from the impact. I'd survived long enough to be extracted from the wreckage and transported to the trauma unit, where I'd lingered for 18 hours while the medical team tried desperately to identify what was killing me. They'd run test after test, but oleander poisoning was so rare in the Pacific Northwest that it hadn't even been on their radar. By the time they'd figured it out, my organs were already shutting down. Oh, that's when Jessica had appeared at my bedside, playing the role of the devastated cousin with Oscar-worthy performance. She'd held my hand and whispered encouragement while the machines kept me alive, tears streaming down her face as she begged me not to leave her. The nursing staff had been so moved by her devotion that they'd bent visiting our rules to let her stay with me through those final hours. But in the moments when she thought I was unconscious, when the morphine made my breathing shallow and my responses minimal, Jessica's mask had slipped. She'd checked her phone constantly, scrolling through Ryan's social media profiles and muttering about how unfair it was that she'd never gotten a chance with him. She'd complained to my mother about how the accident had ruined her plans, how she'd been so looking forward to being my maid of honor, how now she'd never get to wear the custom bridesmaid dress she'd spent so much money on. The selfishness of her grief had been staggering, but I'd been too weak to process it fully at the time. It wasn't until those final moments, when she'd leaned close to deliver what she thought was a private confession to my dying ears, that the full scope of her betrayal had become clear. "I did it for us," she'd whispered, her breath warm against my ear. "For our family." You never appreciated what you had, Emma. You took everything for granted. It's the business, Ryan's love, Grandma's favoritism. I couldn't let you just waste it all. At least this way, your death will mean something. I'll make sure the business thrives. I'll take care of Ryan. Help him heal from losing you. Maybe eventually he'll see that I'm exactly what he needs. She'd believed in her twisted logic. That she was doing everyone a favor by murdering me. That she was some kind of savior, rescuing my life's work and my boyfriend from my supposedly inadequate stewardship. The narcissism required to frame murder as an act of benevolence was breathtaking, but it explained so much about Jessica's behavior over the years. Every slight, every moment of jealousy, every passive-aggressive comment had been building toward this ultimate act of taking what she believed should have been hers all along. The most chilling part was how calm she'd been, as she'd confessed. No remorse, no guilt, just a matter-of-fact explanation of her reasoning. She'd stroked my hair like she was comforting a sick child while she'd described how she'd researched different poisons. How she'd chosen oleander because it grew wild in her apartment complex's landscaping. How she'd practiced extracting and concentrating the toxins until she could create a tasteless, odorless additive that would be virtually undetectable. The cookies were perfect, she'd said with genuine pride. Abuela's recipe, but with my special touch. You always said my baking was almost as good as hers. Well, now you know it's better. Mine can do things hers never could. She'd laughed softly at her own joke, as if we were sharing a private moment of humor instead of her confessing to my murder. That laugh had been the last thing I'd heard before the machines flatlined and the world went dark. Now 3 months into my second chance, I understood that Jessica's pathology ran far deeper than simple jealousy or financial desperation. She was a fundamentally broken person who had convinced herself that other people's lives were just resources for her to manage and redistribute according to her own sense of fairness. She didn't see me as a human being with my own rights and desires. She saw me as an obstacle standing between her and the life she deserved. This realization had profound implications for how I needed to handle my return. In those first weeks, I'd fantasized about simply calling the police and reporting her plans. But I quickly realized that I had no proof of a crime that hadn't happened yet, committed by someone who had never actually confessed except to what everyone believed was my corpse. Who would believe that my cousin was planning to poison me based on memories from a timeline that no longer existed? Instead, I'd had to focus on understanding the deeper patterns of her behavior, the psychology that had led her to murder in the first place. I'd started paying attention to the small things I'd missed before. The way she'd borrow my ideas in casual conversation and present them as her own insights days later. How she'd volunteer for tasks at family gatherings, specifically so she could position herself as indispensable while subtly highlighting my supposed shortcomings. The calculated way she'd befriend my boyfriends, always positioning herself as the understanding confidant who really got them in ways I supposedly didn't. I'd also started noticing how she'd manipulated our family dynamics over the years. Jessica had a gift for creating drama between other people while positioning herself as the peacemaker. She'd tell my mother that I'd said something critical about her cooking, then tell me that my mother was disappointed in my career choices, all while offering to mediate the conflict she'd created. She'd done the same thing with my relationships, subtly undermining my confidence while offering herself as the wise counselor who could help me navigate my difficult personality. The pattern was always the same. Create a problem, offer a solution, position herself as essential to everyone's happiness. She'd been practicing the manipulation that led to murder for years, just on a smaller scale. Understanding this had helped me develop a strategy for my second life. I couldn't simply avoid the poisoning and hope things would get better. Jessica's pathology meant she would keep finding new ways to tear down my life until she finally destroyed me or I stopped her permanently. The murder attempt wasn't an aberration. It was the inevitable culmination of who she fundamentally was. So I'd started building my own web of influence and protection, but carefully, quietly, in ways she couldn't detect or counter. I'd reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with, people who knew me well enough to notice if my personality suddenly changed or if I started behaving strangely. I'd strengthened my relationships with family members Jessica couldn't easily manipulate, like my father's brother, Uncle Carlos, who had never fallen for her innocent act. Most importantly, I'd started dating David Chen, someone completely outside Jessica's sphere of influence. David had been a revelation. Ryan had been gentle and accommodating, sometimes to a fault. David was observant and protective. Noticed when people treated me poorly and wasn't afraid to call it out. He asked direct questions about family dynamics that made everyone slightly uncomfortable, including Jessica. Within weeks of meeting him, he'd identified her as someone I should be cautious around, based purely on his observations of how she interacted with me in group settings. "She watches you," he'd said after our first Rodriguez family barbecue. "Together, not like family watches family. Like competition watches competition. And she's always positioning herself to be the center of attention when you're talking. Subtle, but it's deliberate." His outside perspective had been invaluable in helping me understand how Jessica's manipulation appeared to neutral observers. Ryan had never noticed these patterns because he'd known Jessica almost as long as he'd known me, and he'd been socialized to see her behavior as normal family dynamics. David, coming in fresh, could see the toxicity immediately. This had made me realize that part of Jessica's success in my previous life had been dependent on everyone around me being too close to the situation to see clearly. She'd counted on family loyalty, shared history, and social pressure to keep people from questioning her behavior too closely. But she'd never had to deal with someone like David, who had no investment in maintaining family harmony at the cost of my well-being. I'd also started leveraging my secret business success in ways Jessica couldn't track. Phoenix Digital Marketing had given me not just financial resources, but access to a network of professionals who could help me in ways my family never could. I'd hired a private investigator through a client referral, presenting it as a routine background check for a potential business partnership. I'd consulted with a forensic accountant about theoretical scenarios involving financial fraud. I'd even spoken with a toxicology expert about research for a novel I was supposedly writing. All of these conversations had given me tools and knowledge that Jessica couldn't anticipate. She was planning her crime based on the MS she remembered trusting. Naive, financially dependent on family goodwill. She had no idea that the Emma she was targeting had spent 3 years building an independent power base that could match or exceed anything she could bring to bear. But perhaps most importantly, I'd started documenting everything. Every conversation, every family gathering, every moment when Jessica's mask slipped slightly. I'd installed discrete recording apps on my phone and started keeping detailed journals of her behavior patterns. I'd created a timeline of her financial troubles, cross-referenced with her increasingly desperate attempts to insert herself into business decisions that weren't hers to make. The picture that emerged was of someone spiraling toward a breakdown, but managing to hide it from everyone except those who knew exactly what to look for. Jessica's carefully maintained facade was held together with debt lies, and an increasingly frantic need to find a solution to problems that were growing beyond her ability to manage. 3 months after my return, she'd started making small mistakes, contradicting herself about her work schedule, asking oddly specific questions about the family business's insurance policies, volunteering for catering tasks that she'd never shown interest in before, particularly anything involving food preparation for large events. She'd also begun what seemed like casual research into my daily routines, asking my mother when I usually got to the catering kitchen, which days I worked late, whether I ever ate lunch alone. But her biggest mistake had been underestimating my relationship with David. She'd clearly expected that breaking up with Ryan would leave me isolated and vulnerable. It's easy to manipulate back into dependence on family relationships she could control. Instead, I'd found someone who made me stronger and more confident. Someone who actively encouraged me to trust my instincts and set boundaries with people who made me uncomfortable. This had clearly frustrated her plans, and I'd started to see signs that she was adapting her approach. The casual questions about my schedule had intensified. She'd started dropping hints about how David seemed controlling and possessive, trying to plant seeds of doubt about our relationship. She'd also begun positioning herself as more essential to family business operations, volunteering for responsibilities that would put her in charge of food service at upcoming events. The most telling change had been her sudden interest in my health and wellness. She'd started recommending supplements and herbal teas, always with some plausible explanation about stress relief or immune system support. She'd offered to bring me homemade lunches when I worked late at the catering kitchen. She'd even suggested we start a regular girls' day routine, complete with spa treatments and healthy smoothies she would prepare herself. Every offer was presented as loving concern for my well-being, but I could see the pattern forming. Jessica was looking for opportunities to introduce something harmful into my system, but she needed the perfect scenario where she could maintain plausible deniability. The wedding cookies had been ideal because they were something I would definitely consume, in front of witnesses, in a context where she could control the preparation, but not be obviously responsible for any negative consequences. Now that the wedding was off, she needed a new opportunity, and she was getting increasingly desperate to create one. This desperation was making her sloppy, more obvious in her manipulations, which was exactly what I needed to build a case against her that would hold up under scrutiny. The challenge was that Jessica was still fundamentally intelligent and careful. She'd successfully planned and executed one perfect murder, which meant she understood how to avoid leaving evidence, how to create plausible alternative explanations for suspicious circumstances, and how to leverage emotional manipulation to prevent people from looking too closely at her actions. I couldn't simply wait for her to make an obvious mistake. I needed to create conditions that would force her to reveal herself in ways she couldn't walk back. That's when I'd started thinking about the family's annual spring fundraiser for the local children's hospital. It was our biggest catering event of the year, involving hundreds of guests and multiple courses of food preparation. Jessica had always volunteered extensively for the event, seeing it as an opportunity to network with Portland's social elite and demonstrate her value to the family business. This year, she'd already begun pushing for more responsibility, suggesting that she could coordinate the dessert service to take some pressure off me and my mother. The fundraiser would be perfect for her purposes. Large-scale food preparation, multiple opportunities for sabotage, and a prestigious social setting where any accident would be seen as tragically embarrassing rather than suspicious. She could position herself as the hero who tried to save the day while secretly orchestrating the disaster that would remove me from the picture. But this year, the fundraiser was going to be perfect for my purposes too, because this time, I would be ready for her. This time, when Jessica Carter tried to destroy my life, she would discover that her intended victim had spent months preparing for exactly this scenario. She would learn that the naive, trusting cousin she remembered no longer existed, and that the woman who had taken her place was someone far more dangerous than she could possibly imagine. The annual Rodriguez Family Catering spring fundraiser had always been my mother's pride and joy, the event that showcased our family's culinary heritage while raising money for Portland Children's Hospital. It brought together 3 generations of recipes, from my grandmother's traditional Mexican dishes to my own modern fusion creations, all served in the elegant ballroom of the historic Academy building in downtown Portland. This year's event was scheduled for the 3rd Saturday in April, exactly 2 weeks before what would have been my wedding date in my previous timeline. As March progressed, I watched Jessica insert herself deeper and deeper into the planning process, always with plausible reasons that our family couldn't argue with. "I've been thinking," she'd said during our monthly family business meeting, held as always in the conference room above our main kitchen. "This year's fundraiser is so important for our reputation. With all the new catering companies opening in Portland, we really need to make sure everything goes perfectly. I'd love to take point on coordinating the service staff, maybe handle the dessert presentation personally. I know it's a big responsibility, but I want to do everything I can to help make this our best event ever." My mother had practically glowed with pride at Jessica's offer. "Mia, that's so generous of you. You've already been working so hard to help with the prep work." She'd turned to me with that expression that meant I was expected to be equally enthusiastic about my cousin's involvement. "Emma, wouldn't it be wonderful to have Jessica take on more responsibility this year? You've been looking so stressed lately." I'd smiled and nodded, playing my part perfectly. "That sounds amazing, Jess. I'd really appreciate the help." Inside, I was taking notes. Jessica had just volunteered for exactly the role that would give her maximum access to food preparation and service. It's minimal oversight from other family members. She was practically writing my case against her for me. I was also thinking, Jessica had continued, encouraged by our positive response, that we should do something special with the dessert course this year. It's maybe a signature item that really represents the Rodriguez family tradition. I've been experimenting with Abuela's polvorones recipe, adding some modern touches that I think would really impress the guests. The polvorones, of course. She was planning to use the exact same method. She'd used to kill me in my previous life, but on a larger scale. The cookies that had been my individual death sentence were going to become a mass casualty event, with me as the primary target and any collateral damage written off as acceptable losses in her quest to destroy my life. That's a wonderful idea, my mother had said, completely missing the implications. Abuela's polvorones were always such a hit at special events, and if you've found ways to modernize them, that could really set us apart from our competitors. I'd watched Jessica's face as my mother spoke, noting the small smile of satisfaction that flickered across her features. She was probably already imagining the newspaper headlines: tragic mass poisoning at charity event. Beloved local catering family devastated by mysterious food contamination. Young entrepreneur dies in hospital after fundraiser disaster. In her mind, she was already planning how to position herself as the grieving family member who would heroically step in to save the business after my tragic death. But Jessica had made one crucial error in her planning. She'd assumed that I would react to the fundraiser the same way I had 2 wedding preparations in my previous life, with trust, excitement, and complete faith in her good intentions. She had no idea that this time I was watching her every move, with the cold clarity of someone who had already died once from underestimating her cousin's capacity for evil. Over the following weeks, I'd started my own preparation for the fundraiser, but with goals very different from Jessica's. While she was perfecting her murder weapon, I was building the trap that would destroy her completely and permanently. First, I'd arranged for additional security at the event, framing it as a necessary precaution given the high-profile guest list and the valuable art collection in the historic Academy building. The security company I'd hired through Phoenix. Digital marketing was top tier, with experience in corporate investigations and evidence collection. They would be positioned throughout the venue, recording everything, including all food preparation and service activities. Second, I'd invited several very special guests to the fundraiser, people Jessica had no idea were connected to me. Dr. Sarah Martinez, toxicology specialist from OHSU who consulted for Phoenix Digital Marketing on pharmaceutical advertising campaigns. Detective James Park from Portland Police Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit, whose department had hired us to develop their community outreach materials. Maria Santos, a forensic accountant whose firm had worked with several of our clients and who happened to specialize in cases involving fraud and embezzlement. None of these people would seem out of place at a charity fundraiser attended by Portland's professional community, but all of them would be uniquely qualified to recognize and document any criminal activity they witnessed. Jessica would be committing her crimes in front of an audience of experts who could testify to exactly what they'd observed. Third, I'd begun creating a comprehensive digital trail of Jessica's behavior leading up to the event. Every text message, every email, every social media interaction was being archived and analyzed. I'd installed monitoring software on the family business computers that tracked all usage, including deleted files and internet search history. I'd even placed discrete recording devices in the main kitchen and storage areas, hidden among the existing security equipment in ways that couldn't be detected without professional debugging tools. Most importantly, I'd started building a financial case against Jessica that would explain her motive for attempted murder. Working with my forensic accountant contact, I'd traced her debt load, her spending patterns, and her increasingly desperate attempts to maintain a lifestyle she couldn't afford. We documented her credit card balances, her unpaid rent, her car loan, arrears, in the series of failed real estate deals that had pushed her to the brink of bankruptcy. What we'd discovered was even worse than I'd suspected. Jessica wasn't just struggling financially, she was actively engaged in fraud. She'd been using falsified income statements to qualify for loans, creating fake rental income by claiming she had tenants in her apartment when she lived alone, and had even forged my signature on a business credit application, claiming I'd agreed to guarantee a loan for her real estate investments. This last discovery had been particularly infuriating. Jessica had been stealing from the family business for months, taking small amounts that wouldn't be immediately noticed, but that added up to significant theft over time. She'd been using her access to our accounts receivable to delay depositing client payments, temporarily borrowing the money for her own use before processing the transactions days or weeks later. She'd also been ordering supplies for personal use through our vendor accounts, then hiding the charges in our general operating expenses. The financial evidence alone would be enough to destroy her, but I wanted more than just theft charges. I wanted her to face consequences for planning my murder, and that meant I had to let her attempt the crime while ensuring that she couldn't actually succeed in harming anyone. This was the most dangerous part of my plan. I had to create conditions where Jessica would feel confident enough to proceed with poisoning the polvorones, while simultaneously ensuring that no one would actually consume the contaminated food. It required precise timing, flawless execution, and a level of risk that kept me awake at night with anxiety. My solution was elegant in its simplicity. On the day of the fundraiser, I would arrange for a last-minute quality control inspection of all food items, conducted by an outside expert as a routine safety precaution for large events. Dr. Martinez, in her capacity as a toxicology consultant, would randomly test samples from every dish being served, including Jessica's polvorones. When the tests revealed oleander contamination, Jessica would be caught red-handed with multiple witnesses present. But to make this work, I needed Jessica to commit fully to her plan. I needed her to prepare the poisoned cookies, bring them to the venue, and go through with placing them in the serving rotation. Only then would the evidence be irrefutable, and only then would her intent to commit mass murder be beyond any reasonable doubt. This meant that for the next several weeks, I had to continue playing the role of the trusting, unsuspecting cousin, while knowing that Jessica was actively planning to kill me and potentially dozens of other people. I had to smile and express gratitude for her help while watching her perfect the very method she intended to use to destroy my life. The psychological toll was enormous. Every family dinner, every business meeting, every casual conversation felt like a performance where the stakes were life and death. I found myself studying Jessica's face obsessively, looking for signs of guilt or remorse that never appeared. Instead, she seemed more energetic and enthusiastic than I'd seen her in years, clearly invigorated by the prospect of finally achieving her goals. But as the fundraiser date approached, something unexpected began happening. Jessica's behavior started shifting in ways that suggested she was having second thoughts not about the morality of murder, but about the specific logistics of her plan. She'd begun asking probing questions about the event timeline, the guest list, and the food service protocols. She seemed particularly concerned about how much oversight there would be of the dessert preparation and whether anyone else would be helping her with the polvorones. This was when I realized that Jessica's criminal intelligence was both her greatest strength and her ultimate weakness. She was smart enough to plan a nearly perfect murder, but she was also paranoid enough to constantly second-guess herself when the stakes were highest. Her need for control and certainty was making her increasingly nervous about variables she couldn't predict or manage. I decided to exploit this anxiety by introducing just enough uncertainty to keep her off balance without alerting her to the trap being set. I began making small, innocent changes to the fundraiser plans that would force her to adapt her timeline. I suggested moving the dessert service earlier in the evening. I volunteered additional family members to help with food preparation. I mentioned that we were expecting several local food critics to attend, which would mean extra attention on the quality and presentation of every dish. Each change was presented as a positive development that would make the event more successful. But I could see the stress building in Jessica's expression as she realized her carefully laid plans would need constant adjustment. She started working longer hours in our kitchen, supposedly perfecting her polvorones recipe, but actually trying to figure out how to maintain Her murder plot, despite the changing circumstances, this was exactly what I needed. A nervous, stressed Jessica was much more likely to make mistakes, leave evidence, or reveal her true intentions through careless words or actions. She was also more likely to proceed with her original plan even when conditions weren't ideal, because backing down would mean abandoning months of preparation and losing what she saw as her best opportunity to eliminate me. As we entered the final week before the fundraiser, Jessica's mask began slipping more frequently. She snapped at family members who offered suggestions about the dessert presentation. She became possessive of the kitchen space where she was working, claiming she needed privacy to perfect her surprise for the guests. Most tellingly, she started making small but significant errors in her cover story, contradicting herself about her preparation timeline and the specific ingredients she was using. I documented every slip, every contradiction, every moment when her carefully constructed innocent persona cracked to reveal the calculating killer underneath. By the time the fundraiser arrived, would have enough evidence to prove not just that Jessica had attempted murder, but that she had planned it, meticulously over a period of months, while lying constantly to everyone who trusted her. The spring fundraiser was going to be the culmination of everything Jessica Carter had worked toward in her twisted quest to steal my life. But it was also going to be the moment when she discovered that her intended victim had spent even more time and effort preparing for their final confrontation. This time, when the polvorones were served, Jessica Carter would be the one whose life was destroyed by poison. Not literally, I wasn't a killer like her, but metaphorically, completely and irreversibly. She would consume the bitter taste of justice, and she would find it far more devastating than any toxin she could have extracted from her garden of oleander flowers. The week leading up to the spring fundraiser felt like living inside a pressure cooker, every conversation loaded with subtext, every smile hiding calculations that could mean life or death. I found myself studying Jessica's movements with the intensity of a hawk watching its prey, noting how she arrived at the catering kitchen earlier each morning, how she stayed later each evening, always working alone on her special batch of polvorones. That would supposedly be the crown jewel of our dessert presentation. She'd established a routine that was almost ritualistic in its precision. Every morning, at exactly 6:30, she would unlock the side entrance to our kitchen with the key my mother had given her months ago, supposedly for emergency access, but now serving as her private pathway to attempted murder. She would spend the first hour alone before any other family members arrived, working on what she claimed was the delicate tempering process for her chocolate coating variations. I knew better. During those solitary morning hours, Jessica was preparing her oleander extract. Using equipment she'd purchased separately and stored in a locked toolbox that she kept in her car, I'd confirmed this through my private investigator who had been tracking her purchases and movements for weeks. She'd bought a small food dehydrator, specialized extraction glassware, and even pH testing strips all the tools necessary to create a concentrated, stable toxin that would remain potent when mixed into cookie dough. The methodical nature of her preparation was both terrifying and fascinating. This wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. Jessica had approached murder with the same systematic attention to detail she brought to her real estate closings. She'd researched extraction methods, tested concentration levels, and calculated dosages with scientific precision. In another context, her thoroughness might have been admirable. In this context, it was the mark of a true psychopath. But Jessica's careful planning had one critical flaw. She had no idea that her every move was being documented by someone who understood her methods better than she realized. While she thought she was working in secret, I was building an evidence file that would eventually include photographs of her extracting oleander sap, recordings of her testing various concentration levels, and financial records showing her purchase of equipment that had no legitimate use in commercial baking. The irony wasn't lost on me that Jessica's own obsession with documentation, inherited from our grandmother's meticulous record-keeping traditions, was now working against her. She photographed each step of her process, supposedly for quality control, but actually because she couldn't resist creating a permanent record of her criminal genius. These photos, taken on her personal phone and automatically backed up to cloud storage would eventually become evidence of premeditated murder when my cybersecurity consultant accessed them through perfectly legal data recovery methods. 3. Days before the fundraiser, Jessica made what she probably thought was a clever adjustment to her timeline. During our final planning meeting, held in the conference room where 3 generations of Rodriguez women had made business decisions, she announced that she wanted to prepare the polvorones the night before the event rather than the morning. I've been thinking about the logistics, she'd said, her voice carrying that tone of helpful concern she'd perfected over years of manipulation. If I prepare the cookies the night before, I can focus entirely on the hot dishes and service coordination on the day of the event. It'll reduce stress for everyone, and the polvorones will actually taste better after the flavors have had time to meld overnight. My mother had nodded approvingly, always supportive of anything that would make our biggest event of the year run more smoothly. That's very thoughtful, Mia. You've really been thinking about every detail. And agreed, playing my part in this deadly theater. But inside, I was calculating the implications of Jessica's timing change. Preparing the poisoned cookies the night before would give her more privacy and control. But it would also mean the contaminated food would be sitting in our refrigeration system for nearly 24 hours before being served. This extended timeline created additional opportunities for evidence collection and intervention. More importantly, Jessica's decision revealed something crucial about her psychological state. She was becoming increasingly confident in her plan, so certain of success that she was willing to adjust major elements at the last minute. This overconfidence was exactly what I needed to ensure she would follow through with the attempt, while giving me maximum opportunity to document her criminal intent. After the meeting, I'd lingered in the conference room, pretending to review catering timelines, while actually activating the recording device I'd hidden behind our family portrait. Jessica had stayed behind too, supposedly to finalize dessert presentation details with my mother. But I could see her watching me with that calculating expression she wore when she thought no one was looking.
Amma,
She'd said as my mother gathered her papers and prepared to leave. I hope you know how much this opportunity means to me. Being trusted with such an important part of the fundraiser, representing our family's traditions in front of all these influential people, I won't let you down. The words were perfect, gracious, humble, appropriately grateful. Her tone carried an undercurrent of something that made my skin crawl. There was anticipation there, barely concealed excitement that had nothing to do with professional achievement and everything to do with the prospect of finally eliminating the obstacle that stood between her and everything she believed she deserved. I know you won't, I'd replied, meeting her gaze directly. You've always been so dedicated to our family. I can't imagine what we'd do without you. The double meaning in my words wasn't accidental. Jessica heard only the surface compliment, but I was really acknowledging that. I understood exactly how dedicated she was to reshaping our family according to her own vision, even if it meant murder. Her smile in response had been radiant, the expression of someone who believed she was moments away from achieving everything she'd ever wanted. That night I'd lain awake staring at the ceiling of my apartment, my mind racing through every possible scenario for how the next few days would unfold. I'd prepared for every contingency I could imagine, but the stakes were so high that even the smallest unexpected variable could prove catastrophic. If Jessica succeeded in her plan, people would die. If my counterplan failed, I might not get another chance to stop her. But underneath the anxiety and fear, I felt something I hadn't experienced in my previous life, a sense of empowerment that came from finally understanding the true nature of the person who had destroyed me. Jessica Carter was brilliant and dangerous, but she was also fundamentally predictable. Her narcissism, her need for control, her belief in her own superiority, these traits that made her so effective as a manipulator also made her vulnerable in ways she couldn't recognize. She expected her victims to remain passive, to trust her, even when their instincts warned them otherwise. She counted on family loyalty and social pressure to prevent anyone from questioning her too closely. Most importantly, she assumed that her intelligence and careful planning would always be superior to anyone else's ability to detect and counter her schemes. This time, she was wrong on all counts. The day before the fundraiser, I arrived at our catering kitchen at 5 in the morning, a full hour and a half before Jessica's usual arrival time. I needed to make some final preparations that couldn't be detected or interfered with, installations that would ensure every moment of Jessica's cooking process was captured and preserved for later evidence. The kitchen felt different in the pre-dawn darkness. Familiar spaces transformed into something almost sinister by the knowledge of what would happen there in a few hours. I moved through the prep areas by memory, checking the placement of the micro cameras my security consultant had installed in positions that would capture Jessica's workstation from multiple angles. The devices were so small and well concealed that even a thorough search wouldn't reveal them unless someone knew exactly what to look for. I also verified the chemical detection system we'd installed in the ventilation system above Jessica's preferred workspace. If she used any volatile compounds during her extraction process, sensors would capture air samples that could later be analyzed to confirm the presence of oleander derivatives. This evidence would be crucial for proving that she'd actually prepared toxins in our kitchen, not just brought pre-made poison from elsewhere. But my most important task that morning was preparing the substitution containers that would prevent anyone from actually consuming Jessica's poisoned cookies. Working with Dr. Martinez, I'd prepared identical-looking polvorones made with safe ingredients, packaged in containers that exactly matched the ones Jessica would use for her deadly batch. When the moment came for the food safety inspection, the contaminated cookies would be quietly replaced with safe ones. Ensuring that Jessica's criminal intent was documented without anyone being harmed, this substitution plan was the most complex part of my strategy, requiring precise timing and flawless execution. Jessica had to believe that her poisoned cookies were actually being served to guests. Otherwise, she might panic and expose herself prematurely. But the switch had to happen in a way that couldn't be traced back to me, preserving my cover as an innocent family member who had no idea what her cousin was planning. As I finished my preparations and reset everything to appear undisturbed, I heard the familiar sound of Jessica's BMW pulling into our parking lot. 6-20-8 in the morning, 2 minutes earlier than her usual arrival time. Even under the stress of preparing for murder, she maintained the punctuality that had always been one of her most notable traits. I quickly made my way to the small office adjacent to the kitchen, positioning myself where I could observe Jessica's activities without being seen. Through the interior window that allowed management to supervise food preparation, I watched her enter the kitchen with a large insulated bag and the locked toolbox she'd been bringing to work all week. What I witnessed over the next 2 hours was a masterclass in criminal methodology. Jessica moved through her preparation with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed every step multiple times. She began by setting up a small portable workspace in the corner furthest from our main security cameras, using her own equipment to create what was essentially a mobile laboratory for toxin preparation. From her toolbox, she retrieved sealed containers of what I knew was dried oleander material. Along with the extraction apparatus she'd assembled from laboratory supply purchases, working with latex gloves and using techniques she'd clearly researched extensively, she began the process of creating a concentrated liquid extract from the plant material. The transformation was remarkable to watch. The Jessica I knew from family gatherings, warm, charming, always quick with a joke or a compliment, had been replaced by someone coldly focused and methodical. Her movements were precise and economical, with no wasted motion or unnecessary flourishes. This was Jessica in her true element, practicing the art of murder with the same attention to detail she brought to closing real estate deals. As she worked, she periodically checked her phone, photographing various stages of the process with the clinical detachment of a scientist documenting an experiment. These photos would later prove to be some of the most damning evidence against her, showing not just her preparation of poison, but her obvious pride in the sophistication of her methods. After 90 minutes of extraction and concentration work, Jessica had produced a small vial of clear liquid that looked completely innocuous, but contained enough oleander toxin to kill dozens of people. She held the vial up to the light, examining it with obvious satisfaction before carefully sealing it and placing it in a specialized storage container. Only then did she begin the process of preparing the actual cookies. Using our family's traditional polvorones recipe as her base, She worked with the same care and attention she'd shown during her toxin preparation. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. She was using our grandmother's beloved recipe, a symbol of our family's love and tradition, as the delivery method for mass murder. As she mixed the oleander extract into specific portions of the cookie dough, Jessica's expression remained calm and focused. There was no hesitation, no moment of moral doubt or emotional conflict. She was simply completing a task she'd planned and prepared for, as methodical as if she were following any other recipe. This absence of conscience was perhaps the most chilling aspect of watching her work. I'd always known that Jessica was capable of manipulation and cruelty, but seeing her prepare to commit mass murder with the same emotional detachment she might show while organizing her closet was profoundly disturbing. She wasn't a person driven to desperate action by impossible circumstances. She was a predator who had found her perfect hunting ground. By 8:30, Jessica had completed her deadly preparation and begun the process of shaping and baking the contaminated cookies. She worked in small batches, carefully segregating the poisoned ones from a control group of safe cookies that would allow her to taste test her work without risking her own life. Even in the midst of planning mass murder, she was protecting herself with the kind of methodical risk management that characterized all her major life decisions. As other family members began arriving for the day's prep work, Jessica seamlessly transitioned back into her public persona. She greeted everyone with her usual warmth and enthusiasm, chatting about the upcoming event while continuing to work on what everyone believed was simply an elaborate dessert presentation. "These are going to be absolutely perfect," she'd announced. To my mother, when asked about her progress, "I've been experimenting with the coating technique, and I think I've created something really special. The guests are going to remember these polvorones for the rest of their lives." The rest of their lives. The phrase would have been amusing if it weren't so literally accurate for those she intended to poison. But Jessica delivered it with such genuine enthusiasm that even I, knowing exactly what she meant, found her performance convincing. This was Jessica's greatest strength as a criminal, her ability to compartmentalize her true intentions so completely that her surface behavior remained entirely natural and believable. She wasn't struggling to maintain a false front or fighting to hide her guilt. In her mind, she was simply executing a well-planned solution to a problem that had plagued her for years. As the morning progressed, and our kitchen filled with family members preparing for the fundraiser, I watched Jessica interact with everyone with her usual charm and helpfulness. She complimented my aunt's table arrangement suggestions, offered to help my younger cousin with his serving technique, and even took selfies with the beautifully arranged polvorones that would have made any social media follower believe she was simply a proud baker showing off her latest creation. But I noticed small details that revealed her underlying tension. The way she positioned herself between other people in her workstation, subtly blocking anyone from getting too close to the specific containers holding her poisoned cookies. How she volunteered for additional tasks that would keep her in the kitchen throughout the day, ensuring she maintained control over her deadly desserts until the moment they were served. Most tellingly, I observed how she interacted with me specifically. Jessica's behavior toward me had shifted from the casual family affection she'd always shown to something more intense and focused. She watched my reactions to everything, seeming to gauge whether I suspected anything unusual about her preparations. She also made several comments about how excited she was for me to taste the final product, how she couldn't wait to see my reaction to her special surprise. These interactions carried an undertone of anticipation that had nothing to do with normal family pride and culinary achievement. Jessica was savoring the prospect of watching me consume the poison she'd prepared, looking forward to the moment when she could observe my suffering while maintaining her cover as the concerned cousin who was trying to help. This realization crystallized something for me about Jessica's psychology that I'd never fully understood before. She wasn't just planning to kill me for practical reasons like inheritance or eliminating competition. She was looking forward to the emotional satisfaction of watching me die, of being present for my destruction while appearing completely innocent to everyone around us. This sadistic element of her personality explained so much about her behavior. Over the years, it's the way she'd always seemed slightly too pleased when I experienced setbacks or disappointments. how she'd positioned herself to be the first person I turned to during difficult times, offering comfort that in retrospect felt more like feeding on my distress than genuine empathy. Jessica Carter wasn't just a murderer. She was a predator, who had spent years positioning herself to eventually destroy the person she'd chosen as her primary target. The wedding cake poisoning in my previous life hadn't been an isolated incident of desperate greed. It had been the culmination of a years-long campaign of psychological warfare that was always intended to end in my death. Understanding this changed everything about how I viewed our relationship and how I needed to handle our final confrontation. This wasn't just about stopping a single murder attempt or exposing financial fraud. This was about neutralizing someone who would never stop hunting me unless she was completely and permanently destroyed. As evening approached and Jessica finished her preparations for the next day's event, I realized that tomorrow's fundraiser would be more than just a charity event or even a criminal sting operation. It would be the final battle in a war that had been going on for years, even though only one of us had known we were fighting. Tomorrow, Jessica Carter would discover that her perfect victim had become her perfect nemesis. And unlike our previous encounters, this time only one of us would walk away with our life intact. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Let's click and check them out.